Perfect. So let me get started. So first of all, thanks for having me. This is my first React talk, and I'm pretty excited to see a large group of audience turned up. Okay, and the talk is today. I'm going to talk about human memory-based storage model, somewhat deceptive, and yeah, it's something interesting which I came up with and built a library. I'd like to share the idea with you. Before I get started, let me introduce myself. And who am I? So I'm a developer. That's the reason I'm here. I work with Yahoo, and Yahoo still exists for people who are not aware. And they do pay well, so I have to stick with Yahoo. And I do love JavaScript. That's the reason there's a heart symbol with JavaScript. So I've been practicing JavaScript for almost 8 years now. And hopefully something, and I'm a coffee addict. That's the reason you see a pic with coffee. I wanted to showcase that, so that's the reason the pic is there. But last one is, I'm actually a stage fright person. I'm a bit nervous when I talk on stage, and let me see if I can overcome that this time. Before I get started, why human memory? A question can be arised. Why did I choose human memory, and what is a... Yeah, human memory is complex. Why do you want to mimic a human memory to a store and do with it? So I was reading an article, and I felt it was an interesting thing with our own memory, that is our own brain. Brain acts as a store, if you realize it very much. And behind it, it memorizes the content, and it gives the content. How does it work? There are a lot of things which happens, right? So I try to look into it and come up with something which is interesting, and maybe try to mimic, not to a great extent, but to a smaller extent. So I like to share that idea. Before I get started, I just thought, the next question is, are you a genius? Yeah, I'm talking about brain, so you should be, the question is, are you a genius or not, right? So how many people are genius over here? Raise your hand. That should be fair. Oh, no? You're surprising. Just one hand raised, and hopefully that's fine. Yeah, that's fine. I think that's interesting. Let's keep moving. So, so hopefully we see something. So I'm going to ask you a very quick question. Okay. So before that, you need to remember the objects what I show on the screen. Okay. So the first object is a sock, then you have a funnel, then you have a pen, you have a coconut tree, don't ask me why it is there, and a ball and a monkey. I give you 10 seconds and the countdown starts now. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Remember the objects. I'm not going to show it anymore. And I think you're a genius, right? I don't know how many people are genius, but that was a very low number. So let's get started with this very simple calculation. So what is 27 into 8? Anyone can shout out? 1, 50, 60, 70, what is it? Okay, that's fine. So who got the answers very fast? You want to raise hand or just say that you got the answer correct? So whoever answered it, they might be a genius. Okay. Okay, next thing is pretty interesting. You need to recite the last 5 letters of English alphabet and on backwards. Okay, start now. And the first alphabet, or the backwards is Z or Z. So start with Z and repeat Z to the whatever the character. Just 5, that's sufficient. Did you recite it? And just try to recite it. I don't want you to just say, okay, I didn't recite. Okay. Did you recite? Done? No. Done. That's perfect. So, okay, there's one more thing left, and this is a bit of an exercise. I don't want you to do, but I have to make you do. So, you need to stand up and sit down, as much I ask. Okay, you need to stand up. Please stand up. Sit down. Stand up. Sit down. Okay, let's try it last one more time. Stand up. That was like guys are standing always. Okay, that's perfect. You can sit down now. Okay, that's cool. So that's done, and we are almost close to the exercise. And how many people remember the objects which I shared you in the first screen, right? So I told you to remember the objects, and they were close to how many objects, and do people? 6? Oh, that's perfect. So you guys are inching closer to genius. And anyone can say me all the 6 objects if you think you're comfortable. Yeah.
So you know.
Yeah, you can't. There's no clue.
People, bang, and the ball.
So how many people cracked it? Just raise your hands. Okay, that's fine. So how many people could crack that? You cracked it, and of course you got to know the answer. So close to 8 or 9. Oh, that's surprisingly less. And the reason is, okay, 10 people are genius. Let's keep to that. Stick to that. So this is interesting, right? So I asked you something, and you don't. I understand it's very difficult to remember an object, and you don't have to remember it. There's no pressure to remember, or you're not writing a test to remember it. But this is something your memory, right? Your memory can't memorize something which is just acted like. Now what happened is you could remember for less than a minute. Okay, so the reason why you could remember this less than a minute is you've fallen into a short-term memory or a working memory. That is what your brain can remember. After that, your brain just forgets these things. And this happens to everyone. And if the 10 people who remember, they're really genius because they were able to handle it for more than a minute. Okay. And how does a human memory work, and what is it types, right? First, before starting work, so human memory is categorized into 3 types, okay? Not the type, how you memorize stuff. So one is sensory, the second is short term, and the third is long term. Sensory is something which you have something to do with vision or sense or anything which you don't have pay attention to it. You just listen to it and forget, and it just stays in your mind for less than a second. And short term is something like short term is sort of called as a working memory. You keep practicing it every time, each and where. Like if you have to be working now and you have to be if you're getting paid, that's because of your short term or working memory, because you need to practice a lot of stuff and you keep memorizing and keep working on that. And long term is something referring to which you remember for lifetime or more than a minute. So that's called as a long term memory. And this, how does it work? By the way, how does the memory work, right? So you capture an incoming info comes in, like you grab an info and that gets into sensory memory, and sensory memory then, if you pay attention, it gets into working memory. That is, if you pay attention, it goes more than a second, then you take a working memory where you pay attention, do something with that, and if you have to do something longer, then it gets into a long-term memory where you encode the data and store it and retrieve it back, right? Sorry, I have water for something? Can I get water? That's because I'm nervous. That happens, and that's the reason I had to keep drinking water. I don't have water now, unfortunately. So hopefully I get it one.
No.
Thanks, man.
No worries.
Hopefully I'm back now. Sorry for that. And so let me get started and revise this. So how does sensory memory work? So as I said, if you are in a presentation, let's assume that you're going to a boring presentation where your project manager shows you some slides and he's asking you to remember some KPIs. Who the hell cares? Just for a second, right? Think of it as a sensory memory and working memory. How does a working memory do? So if you have to get paid today, you have to have a working memory. Else you are not a dev, I don't know what you are then. So the machine shows that you have to keep working, and in order to stick to your job, you have to have a working memory. And the last thing is long term. Long term is something which is stuck to you, like something your snake has bit you, and you can remember that instance forever because the snake has bit you, right? And for me, a long term memory would be, I'd been to Paris. And that was a very wonderful experience for me, and I felt that's something I can remember and recap or recall it whenever I want. So that's how I say long-term, short-term, or sensory memory, right? So how do we apply this? The next question comes is, hey Ajay, can we apply this to a store? So we have been using store for quite a while now. It started with Flux, where you could have a store and you could have multiple parts of store. So Flux, I don't want to talk about Flux because I'm very bad at it. Redux, I have been using Redux for quite a while now. And I realized Redux is a single store, right? And they preach on immutable data. That's how it works. But they don't have a segregation of data. The reason they don't have it, they don't care about it, and we don't want it. And when I started learning about human memory, I thought I should care about it. And let me create a library and see if it works out or not. So how does the React memory look? So the library, what I wrote was React memory, and how does it look? So I used some of the cool stuffs going around in JavaScript. It's been going around for quite a while. So I created a store called as proxy store. So you guys are familiar with JavaScript proxy, right? So how proxy works. So I use the proxy to create a store and segregate and split the items. So we know that the information is getting into sensory, then gets into short term, then gets into long term, right? So I try to use the proxy to create this whole, mimic this whole concept. And so what it happens now is, we are smart, so I can't go ahead and say, hey, Hajin, just try to process it. I'm not going to create an artificial intelligence or something where I can segregate sensory, short term, or long term. That's not going to be possible. So you have to define what is sensory, what is short term, and what is long term. So what is sensory for me, and how did it apply? So every time when we talk about state is a very big mess, I feel. The reason is, let's take a simple example. You have a child component, and you have a parent component, and you have a super parent component, and you have a super parent component. I don't know what to call that anymore. Okay. So when you have any prop passed to the super parent component, what happens is it impacts all the child component. If you remember it or not, or you curse React for it, it should component update gets called, and everything gets re-rendered. And you realize that, oh, the state got messed. I was playing around with state. Now I don't know what to do. And you move everything to props, right? So this happens to everyone. This is not whether you're senior, whether you're junior, whether you're experienced or anything. This is a very common problem which everyone faces, and they try to segregate where the data has to fall. So what I thought is sensory has to be something which is very tightly coupled with the component, and the life cycle has to be very tightly coupled with the component as well. So when the component starts, that's when it mounts. The data has to have its default state, okay? And when the component unmounts, the data has to fall back to its default state. So during that phase, it has to remember whatever it has collected and whatever you have done with that specific data, right? And next comes the short-term working memory, or short-term or working memory, you can call it. So everything specific to application scope, right? So let's take store works that way. Redux store is completely based on application scope. That is, anything to do with application state, you handle it in a single store, and you segregate it whatever you want, right? So I wanted to create which refers to application store. That is, when an application exits your store, the data gets reset. That is, when your application, you exit out of your application, the data gets reset. The next thing comes is a long term. How do I relate long term? It was very easy for me to relate long term because long term is something which lies on your browser forever, right? As a client, I know browser is something which I could use, and I had to store it for long term until the browser cache is clear, the data persists there, right? And you would need that, of course. I've tried to use external libraries or create a storage for handling the whole long-term stuff. And why did I encode or decode the data? There's a question like, why I put encode and decode? I don't want the users to know what the data is. So I encoded to a base 64 data and stored it onto the DOM. Also stored it onto the local storage. So whenever the user tries to look at our sniff and look at the data, he doesn't understand what the data is stored. And when I retrieve back, I decode it back to JSON string and do whatever stuff. And is it safe to do an encode decode? That should be a question, right? So anyone can trace A to B, B to A. I can do it on any send. But I've used Crypto.js. So I try to use Crypto.js, which is used for your blockchain for hashing and all these algorithms. So I went ahead and used Crypto.js. So you create a secret key. And I try to use it in one of my pet projects. You create a secret key, pass the secret key down to the, pass the secret key down to the Crypto.js library, and the Crypto.js encrypts. And so it's very difficult to decrypt until you do something with it. It's very difficult to decrypt that part of the script, even though it lies on the client. Yeah, if you're a genius, you could go ahead and decrypt that. So how does the code look like? So, sorry. Can you see the code? That's perfect. Okay, so as everyone, I'm not sure how many people are aware of Redux. Redux is a very common stuff happening now. And everyone wants to learn Redux and everyone wants to learn React because that's the best dual combination which is lying there. And so I tried to sort of mimic Redux and create my own store. I'm not sitting on top of Redux and doing something. It's a completely new store concept. So what you do is, it's all the concept, whatever you see on whatever you have done until now on Redux, I try to replicate that in a bit. Okay, instead of creating a store, I went ahead and created a memory because it's a React memory, something based on memory, right? And then you have sensory, short, and long. So I classified these things. This is a default state for a memory, what I'm trying to do here. I classified into three things. That's sensory, short, and long, right? What does a sensory do here, right? As I said, sensory is very tightly coupled with your component. So I didn't know how to stick to the component, so I had to hack it and get it through. So let's see how it works. So what I did is, every component has a name associated with it. If today you write a card component has a name called card component, right? So something like that. So, and it's unique to and you cannot have a duplicate component name. And if you're trying to do so, I don't know how you could work out, but it'll never work on React. Okay, so you have a component name. So I came up with a convention where underscore refers to the scope, which is the least scope. That's a private scope. So I've been using JavaScript for quite a while. So I thought I should be using underscore for it. So I went ahead and used underscore for sensory values. And for short, it's as is. And for long, I'm very fond of jQuery when it was there. So I thought I'll use it $. Why shouldn't I use it? So I started using $. But it's up to you to use whatever you want. So the component name followed by underscore was very required. And then you have all the default state which you require there, right? So you could have your own default state respective to the, or default props respective to the component. Then you have short, then you have long. You set or you create a default memory. The next thing you have to do is a provider. A provider is nothing but a higher order component, which you pass the context down, and the context, you can access the context. And what we do is we wrap this with a connect, and so we can pass the props up. So this is something similar to Redux. So if you go ahead and look at the Redux library, it's the same snippet of code because I copied from there. So you have a provider, and the provider, I passed down the memory, which I created. And that same applies to React Router. You could pass down the memory and it works fine, right? So the next thing comes up is actions. Of course, you need an action. Anything you do, you need to perform an action here. So actions is nothing but a set of objects, you could see it as. So I don't want to get into more depth, but a set of actions like increment memory, an object which comprises of, I created something called increment sensory, increment short, and increment long. And it returns a promise or returns an object by itself, and this gets resolved and becomes the irrespective props or the state for that specific variable, right? So you see there's something I've done unique here. That's called sensory unique key. The reason I had to do this with sensory unique key is I couldn't attach component with a reference. So I thought I should be creating a reference. I cannot create a reference which I could attach with it. So I went ahead and created an hack where anything starting from underscore sensory followed by the unique key is a unique key referencing the component or a view. right? So how do you access it? So if you see a view or component, you see that I'm passing something called as, so you see there's a bottom, there's connect, and I've simplified it a bit. You don't have to worry about map state to props, map props to action, because that's not the care. So it becomes very simplified, a vanilla version. You need to pass all the, you see an array of keys at the bottom. So the array of key you passed to your component is what you're going to access, right? You see count, underscore count, dollar count. These are the things, and actions as a second parameter you have to pass down. So actions, you could have all the actions and pass it down, and so you could access it within your view, right? And only the unique key is the sensory unique key which you see. So I said that's the secret key which I used to map the component. So whatever you want to do respective to that component lifecycle will be used, will be hooked with this underscore sensory underscore unique key. So whenever you create underscore sensory followed by any name, that references to that component lifecycle prop. That is, you can use it for that component lifecycle. When it unmounts, it clears and goes back to its default state, right? So that's how it looks, and I went ahead and created a demo to show you. I know people might not believe, what the heck is this guy talking? And let's see if it works. Fingers crossed. The reason why I'm talking is I had to work till today. I was working a couple of hours to get this working. The shit doesn't work for some reason. Okay, I think it should be here. Oops. Is the internet working or nope? Sorry about that. Let's see if it works now. Hopefully. Okay, so this is the demo what I created. So this I've created with a React router, so to showcase how it works, right? So I have a counter with sensory memory, right? And the counter, I'm just going to do a simple, it's an hello world with any React Redux application. The counter, I'll just say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's not a sitting or standing exercise, so it's fine to say a count. And now what I do is I just go to the next view, that is the shot. And I try to go back to the sensory view now, and you see the counter reset its value to 0 now, right? So it resets its value back to 0. And if I go to shot, and if I increment the value 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, let's do that. Go back to sensory, that's the view, and come back to shot. You see that the value was retained because it's an application state, and it retains for the whole application state. And let's go back to long now, right? Long, and I just do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, right? So now, yep, I don't know what I'm trying to do. I'm just going to refresh. Hopefully the internet works. Nope. I have a very bad time with the internet the whole day. Okay, hopefully works now. Oops, oh, okay, C7, so the value exists. And you have short with 0, sensory with 0, so that's how it works. And you can replicate this, and you can use it for any sort of application. And I told you I encoded the value, right? So we can just go ahead and inspect the applications. Application, local storage. Can I see a local storage? Yep, that's right. And the value you see is not a JSON string, right? I've not used a JSON string. It's something which no one can understand. If it's a person who's coming and he's trying to sniff through the object or something, the local storage, he has nothing to see. He just sees some sort of strings, and the strings which makes no sense to him, right? So hopefully, you guys give it a try. Hopefully it works. So it's just in a very initial state. I've been working on it for a month, but yeah, just working on it, creating it, trying out various stuff. Looking at what Redux does, going through Redux source code and trying out some stuff from there, and trying to simplify Redux. So I thought simplifying Redux would also help. I looked at Unistore, which was an exciting library created by the Preact founder or the Preact creator. And hopefully you guys like it and have a look and see if you find it interesting. If you want to contribute, please go ahead and ask if you have any suggestions or better way to do this library, please let me know so I can incorporate those changes in here. Thank you.